Welcome everyone to our free GRE Verbal webinar. Whether you're here for the first time or you've been to one of our webinars before, thanks for joining us. My name is Andrew and I'm one of the student success advisors here at Ready4. I consult with our students, connecting them with courses that best suit their needs, and I'm happy to be able to host today's webinar and give you all a chance to meet one of our talented instructors. So let's get started. A couple of things to know before we begin. You're all muted, so depending on where you are, anything you say out loud might look crazy to those around you, but it's not going to get our attention. Instead, take a minute to find the question box. This is going to be an important tool for you today. Any questions you have about the content of today's lesson, the GRE in general, or about our courses, you can type them right into that question box, and we'll either respond to you directly or during our Q&A session at the end. Also, when it's time to cast your vote, when we're doing in-class examples, you're going to type your answer right into that question box. We're going to be sharing the slides, answer explanations, and a handout exploring our services at the end, so don't forget to download those as well. Finally, the session is being recorded, so be on the lookout for our follow-up email after class if you'd like to view the recording or the handouts, especially if you're tuning in now from your mobile device. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'll start by telling you a little bit about what we do here at Ready4. Then I'll pass things off so you can see one of our experts in action. While these free webinars aren't going to teach you everything you need to know for the exam, they provide a solid intro to the test and a chance to meet one of our instructors and get an idea of what our courses are like. I promise that whatever stage you're at in the GRE, you're going to take away some strategies today that you can apply and continue to improve on throughout the rest of your practice. If you enjoy this session, stay to the end and I'll jump back on and provide a little bit more information about our courses. We even have a special surprise to say thanks for being here today. That's going to be at the very end of this session. All right, a little bit about us. Ready4 was started out of MIT back in 2013, and our goal ever since has been to make test prep more affordable and more accessible for students. That's why we offer a number of different prep options based on your needs and your budget as you prepare for the exam, ranging from our top-ranked practice tools designed to measure and adapt to your performance so they're better than any book, to our fully immersive prep courses, whether on demand or live, with the best instructors in the industry. We're providing a flexible, mobile-led learning experience to meet the needs of any student, regardless of your location or your background. But I'll talk more about our services and what we offer at the end. I want to introduce our instructor now before we begin the lesson. So today's session will be led by Anthony. Anthony has a perfect score on the GRE, and he's been helping students prepare for the test for over 15 years. He brings a ton of energy to his lessons and really does a great job of challenging students to participate and work through their thinking during each lesson, which is one of the reasons why he's had so much success with our students in the past. Students love Anthony's enthusiasm and personality, but he really knows his stuff, and hopefully you're going to have a chance to see that during today's lesson. All right, I'm going to pass things over now to Anthony, but remember, if there's anything I can help you with, I'm right at the other end of that question box. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Nice to meet all of you. I'm so excited to be here with you and doing this free webinar, and thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Yeah, I love doing these courses. I look forward to working with all of you. And one thing that I really love about these courses is what a wonderful international group of people we always get. We get people from all over the world showing up for these things, and that's really cool and exciting. So, I'd like to get to know you a little bit, and just to jump in, I'd love to hear where are you guys listening in from? Let's see what we've got here. Okay, Kansas, Florida, Texas, North Carolina. Got a big southern contingent here today. Ooh, Bangladesh. Okay, India. All right. Now we're getting pretty diverse. New York City, great. And wow, Nigeria. Gosh, I don't remember the last time we had somebody from Nigeria. Very cool. Well, great. It looks like all around the world, London as well. So thank you all so much for tuning in from wherever you're listening from. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Looking forward to working with you over this webinar. So, okay. Now I'd like to jump in and talk a little bit about reading comprehension today. Our plan today is to talk about main idea questions, but before I get there, I want to spend just a few minutes talking about the GRE in general, making sure you understand a little bit about it. Some of you may already know that, and so I'm going to go fairly quickly, but maybe I'll say something that will be useful and new to you anyway. So let's talk about the GRE overview. The GRE is a nearly 4-hour long test, 3 hours and 45 minutes. It is made up of 3 types of sections, verbal, math, and analytical writing, basically essays. And they can appear in any order except that the essays will always come first. GRE costs about $205, so exactly $205, so it's a significant commitment. And you can take it pretty much any day you want, excepting Sundays and holidays. Actually, I've even been told that in some places Sundays may be an option as well. Check your local listings. Okay, so I mentioned there's 3 kinds of sections here. Analytical writing, which is essays, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. And the first thing you're going to get is the essays. You're going to come in and they're going to say, hi, write some essays. You're going to have 1 analysis of issue and 1 analysis of argument for 30 minutes each. And each of those essays will be scored in a 0 to 6 range in half-point increments, and those 2 scores will then be averaged to get your essay score. After that, you will have verbal and quantitative reasoning. They can appear in any order. Verbal is 20 questions per section, 30 minutes per section. So it is on average 1.5 minutes per question. And it is scored in a 130 to 170 range in 1-point increments. Now it's an average 1.5 minutes. Some may take a little longer, maybe 2 minutes. Some may take a little less, maybe 1 minute. Should balance out. But 1.5 minutes on average, and it certainly shouldn't be going more than about 2.5, 3 minutes at the very maximum on any of those questions. The math sections, again, 2 sections, 20 questions, per section, 35 minutes per section. So you have slightly longer here. You have about 1 minute 45 seconds per question, actually. And again, it is scaled on a 130 to 170 scale in 1-point increments. Those 2 scores, the verbal and quantitative, are then combined to give you a composite score on a 260 to 340 scale. And everyone agrees that that score is much more important than your essay. So, we'll talk a little bit about the essays if you take our course, but it's not something to stress too much about, and certainly you should spend most of your time and attention on these other 2 scores. And then, of course, everyone always wants to know what's actually a good score on this test. And the answer depends not only on the school you're looking at, but also the program and type of program within that school. Obviously, if you want to go to a top program, you're going to want to be above average on each of these sections, but how much above average really depends on the type of program. So, for instance, if you wanted to go to something a little more mathematically driven, like an engineering program, then you'd really need to max out your math score, but there might be a little more leeway to have a verbal score that's, just more good than great. For instance, in 2015, the top 10 engineering programs had an average math score of nearly 166, over the 90th percentile, whereas their average verbal score was only about a 157, which isn't even quite at the 80th percentile. So again, still very good in both sections, still way above average, but a little more forgiving on the verbal. If you're looking to go into a really math-focused program, you need to really max out the math. On the flip side, if you're going to something a little more verbally focused, a literature PhD program, that would put a lot more pressure on you to really max the verbal out, but then the math might just be able to be kind of a little above average and you could get there. Beyond that, for specific schools, obviously if you're not looking quite top tier, there's a little more leeway. Consult your school. You can give them a call, but also they post this information on the internet. Just about every school is going to post their 25th and 75th percentile scores for their incoming classes for a variety of programs. You can take a look at that and get all the information from the school. So Google is your friend here. Just very quickly, again, the essay matters a lot less, but the average score is like a 3.5. So pretty much a 4 or better on the essay is fine. It's not a part of the composite. It is only scored separately. Okay. So this is the point where I always ask whether anyone has any questions about the GRE before we move forward. Questions about the GRE in general? Okay, one thing that people always ask about, and I'm getting a couple people asking about it today, is about the penalty, or if any, for guessing and whether they can skip questions. And the answer is don't skip questions. There is no penalty for guessing. In particular, this test is really very simple in some regard in terms of the way it's scored. It's binary. There's only two ways that your answer can come out, right and wrong. And a wrong answer, a non-answer is a wrong answer. Any question you skip is exactly the same as if you had answered it, but answered it wrong. So the worst thing you can do is leave it blank, because if you answer the question, at least you have some chance of accidentally just guessing it right. Whereas if you didn't answer at all, you're just definitely wrong. No answer equals a wrong answer. So make sure you leave enough time at the end of the sections to go back and fill in answers for anything you skipped, and answer every question. There is no penalty for wrong answers or for guessing. Okay, so don't leave anything blank. Somebody else asked if they could jump around, and yes, the answer is yes. Within a section, you can do the questions in any order. Obviously, unless you have a good reason, you should probably just go straight through. But you are free to move between and among questions in any order you want within a section. Obviously, you cannot jump from one section to another during the test. Okay, so let's go ahead now and jump into our goal for the day, which is to talk about reading comprehension, and specifically to talk about main idea questions. Now, I'm going to start talking specifically about main idea in a minute, but before we do that, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about reading comprehension in general, since this is our introduction to that topic, and you ought to know what the reading comprehension on the GRE is all about. So, the GRE includes a variety of different types of passages, lengths of passages, topic areas, question types, all within the sort of broad rubric of reading comprehension. So let me start by talking about question types. There are several different types of questions I can ask. The most common, though, are the standard multiple choice, choose the right answer questions. And these are just the standard questions that you've seen on basically every standardized test that you've ever done. The SAT, the ACT, the LSAT, the GMAT, the GRE, the MCAT. Basically, everybody does multiple choice. If you've ever taken a test ever, I'm sure you've done this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on talking about sort of the multiple choice, choose the right answer, because you know what this is about. But obviously, we'll see lots of this as we go through the lesson today. Somebody asked, and yes, there are also multiple choice choose all that apply, in which case you can have one or more right answers to that question. And yes, they are a little bit more difficult, a little bit scary perhaps, mainly because you kind of can't guess the right answers easily. And because, sorry, I just lost my train of thought here. You can't guess the right answer easily. There are a lot of ways, and you can't do process of elimination, right? So if the way that you're used to doing this is sort of trying to do process of elimination, it's not going to work here because each answer is independent, and there are a lot of different ways it can come out. If there's just 3 different answer choices, there's 7 ways that could come out. It could be A or B or C or A and B or A and C or B and C or A, B, and C. And if there were 4 answer choices, there'd be 15 ways to answer it. 5 ways, 31. So it very quickly gets to a point where you can't really do any sort of process elimination or make any good guesses. And what that means is that the way you need to treat this is treat it like several different true-false questions that are just sort of presented one after another. You've got 3 or 4 true-false questions, treat them each independently, try to figure them out, and if you get them all right, then obviously you've got it. The only downside here is that there's no partial credit, so if you miss one of them, you miss them all. So yes, they're a little scarier, a little harder. We will see a couple of those in the course. I'm not sure that we have any of them today, but it's definitely something that we'll talk more about as you go along. And the main strategy is just to treat each answer independently and focus on getting the right answer rather than doing any sort of process of elimination. Finally, and very rarely, you may see, and you may not see, a select and passage question at some point in your test. These average either 0 or 1 on the average test. And the select and passage questions are basically just going to ask you to pick the sentence in the passage that does whatever. And those are pretty, straightforward. You just go into the passage and you click on the one that is what they asked you to find, and that's it. And the interface will be self-explanatory when you do that. And again, they're very, very rare. So yes, we will cover all of these sorts of questions in the course if you take the course. I don't think we have any of them today, but definitely it is something that we will cover going forward. All right, so those are different types of questions. There are also different types of passages that you can get. So all told, you're going to have something like 10 different passages of varying length and varying topics on the GRE. In terms of topics, the areas are primarily humanities, science, and social sciences. And so it's very important to read in those areas. Reading comprehension is probably the most practice-driven area of the entire test. So if you're not a strong reader, the most important thing that you can do is just read, and read a lot, and read obviously at an appropriate high level. And read in these areas, humanities, science, social sciences. That's what the test is going to be about. So if you maybe are very strong at reading humanities but weaker at science, then go out there and get something very science-oriented, because that's what you would obviously need to practice. Some high-level sources include the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Economist, Journal of Science, Scientific American, London Review of Books. The list goes on and on. So go out and find those sorts of passages if you're not a strong reader, and work on reading them. That is the best way to become a stronger reader. Now, in addition to various topics, the passages are also of varying lengths. Basically, there are long, medium, and short passages. The long and medium passages are kind of your traditional reading comprehension that, again, as I've said, you've had on basically every standardized test ever. And they're very much focused on traditional reading comprehension, things like kind of understanding the big picture of what the passage is all about and identifying certain details from the passage to answer questions. The short passages are a little bit different. They generally have just one question on them, as opposed to the 2 to 5 that you'll have on longer passages. And the short passages are much less about the traditional reading comprehension stuff. They're not so much about the main idea and the big picture. Instead, the short passages are about arguments and how well you can understand and break down and analyze arguments. These are called critical reasoning questions on other tests, like the GMAT or the LSAT. If you've ever done those, you've seen critical reasoning before. And they're kind of a separate beast. So we will definitely talk about critical reasoning questions in all of our courses, but that's not going to be so much the focus for today. Today we're going to focus on the sort of more traditional big picture, long and medium passages that are traditional reading comprehension. So that's what this reading. And they're usually drawn from high-level academic contexts and sources. In fact, they often take long academic passages and edit them down to just a few paragraphs, 2 or 3 perhaps. And as such, these often will present almost an overwhelming amount of information. Because they've taken a giant thing and they've condensed it down to just a few paragraphs, and they usually condensed it by sort of cutting out all of the sort of connective stuff and not really so much cutting out the facts. So they may have, a dozen different facts or more within the tight space of just a couple paragraphs. But the thing about it is they're only going to ask you maybe 2 or 3 or 4 questions about details in these passages, which means that much of that overwhelming information is never actually going to be tested. So it'll be important for us to develop a method of approaching these passages that enables us not to get bogged down and spending a ton of time trying to understand a bunch of details that may not actually be tested, and allows us just to focus on those things that really matter. And we will talk about that. Beyond that, these passages, again, because they are making high-level academic passages into the passages that they're using, these passages may often make conclusions or analyses rather than merely being neutral. If you think about a graduate thesis or anything like that, these things have a point of view. They have an argument they're making and some conclusion that they're trying to convince you of. So you can expect that many GRE passages will be like that as well, and you ought to look out for that and try to understand what, if anything, it is trying to persuade on. It goes without saying that these will be written often in a confusing or difficult way. Again, they're mimicking graduate level academic texts, which are often themselves written in a confusing and difficult way. And because they're heavily edited, often they read a little bit choppier because they've sort of condensed them down to fit in this very tight space. So again, that's why it's important that you read these high-level texts so you can get comfortable reading these sorts of graduate level texts that are often difficult and confusing. So, you know, if you read any of our passages and you go, wow, this is really dense and kind of awkwardly written, don't kill us. We're just the messenger. We're just doing that because that's what the real GRE does. They want to see that you can handle these sort of graduate level academic texts that may be a little bit dense and confusing, because after all, this is a test to try to get into PhD programs where you will do exactly that. So they need to know that you can handle that sort of information presented in these dense and difficult ways, because that's a skill that you're going to need in graduate school. All right. The final thing here is about the multiple points of view. It is true that many of these passages present multiple points of view on information, and if they do, then it's just very important to note that you need to not only be aware of what is being said, but also pay attention to who's saying it, because in the case that they present multiple points of view, they will often have a question that really turns on not just what was said, but who said it, and often there'll be a wrong answer that's wrong because the answer is just something that was said by somebody else. It's not the person they were asking about. So when you see the multiple points of view, pay attention and watch out for that. Okay. Oh, somebody's saying that most of the time they couldn't comprehend reading comprehension, and I guess the answer. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope that what we're about to do here will help with that. Now, some people say, oh, well, okay, maybe I'll have some outside information on the topic. Maybe I'll get lucky and I'll just get some passages I know something about. Or other people say, well, wait a minute, but if I don't know anything about the passage and somebody else does, no fair, they've got an advantage. And the answer to both of those people is no, not really. It doesn't work that way. The thing to understand about outside information on this test is that the GRE is not a content test. It is not a knowledge test. I'm not interested in how much you know about the subject, and I'm not interested in your outside information. What I'm interested in is how well you can comprehend from the passage and what it is giving you. So the question for all of these questions is not what is true. The question is, what does the passage claim is true? And I've had students who have attempted to rely on outside information, sometimes not even intentionally, but they've ended up relying on outside information, and it has cost them. Some time ago, maybe almost 2 years at this point, I had a student who was an investment banker, and he got a passage on different types of economic indicators, leading and trailing and coincident economic indicators. And I mean, this guy worked with economic indicators every day of his life. And he got a question that was, which of the following does the passage claim is a leading economic indicator? And he missed it. And, you know, I mean, I was doing my lesson with him and I was giving him some crap about it. Like, come on, man, you're an investment banker. You don't know what a leading economic indicator is. You know, God, I don't want to put you in charge of any money. I was giving him some crap about it. But the thing is, I asked him, like, you know, why did you miss this? But I already knew the answer. See, what happened is he looked at those answers and he went, oh, wait, I know that one's a leading economic indicator. Why? Because I know it, because it's something that I've spent my life doing. And there was an answer there that apparently was a leading economic indicator, and he picked it. The problem was the passage never said that that one was a leading economic indicator. And it turns out there was some other answer choice. Maybe in real life it actually isn't a leading economic indicator. Maybe the passage was wrong, but the passage claimed that it was. And ultimately that was the right answer. So when I give you a passage about the Kuiper Belt, I don't care whether you know whether that's astronomy or high fashion. I just care that you can read what I'm telling you and use it to answer the questions. If you have that outside information, the best thing you can do with it is try to put it out of your head and ignore it, because it has no bearing on this test. All right? Okay, so then we're dealing with these difficult, complex, dense passages, and they're about hard topics, and we can't rely on any outside information. So how are we going to understand them? What are we going to do? How are we going to read this? And the answer is, we are going to read not for the details, but for the big picture. So we're aiming to spend maybe 2 minutes reading the passage, maybe 3 at the very most for a long passage, could be 1 for a short passage, but on average, maybe 2 minutes. And in that amount of time, there's no way that you're going to get every single precise detail out of the passage, and it's silly to try. If you try, you will spend a bunch of time, you will still struggle with the details, you will miss the forest for the trees and not really get the main idea, and basically it's all going to fall apart on you. So don't try. Instead, just do the big picture. I don't tend to take a lot of notes, but if you're going to take any notes at all, maybe just a word or phrase on each paragraph just to give you sort of a map of the passage, a general flow of it. Personally, I think that if you're doing this right, if you're just focusing on the big picture, what is the author's main idea, what is the sort of thrust of the passage, what is the attitude that it expresses, if you're just thinking about those kinds of things, you probably don't need any notes at all, okay? Your goal here is to be able to answer the inevitable main idea question about the passage without really needing to go back to the passage at all. If you want to practice this, practice just reading passages and just doing their main idea questions. And if you're finding that you consistently need to go back to the passage to do the main idea question, then what that should tell you is that you're not reading it right, you're not reading it well enough. So that's all I want to get out of it, is what is the big picture, what is the main idea, what is this passage talking about, what is the author's attitude, why did they write it? Somebody spent probably years of their life studying, researching, composing this passage. Somebody thought this was really important to tell you about. Why? Why did they write this passage to you, and why did they want you to read it? That's the kind of thing to think about. Now, it'll take some practice to get your speed up, but put in that time. Now, of course, you may be wondering, well, great, but what happens when the detail questions do come along? You just basically told me not to worry about the details, and I know those questions are coming. And the answer is, that's fine. When you get the detailed questions, you will go back to the passage. You will reread small sections to get the actual detail they're asking about, and you will answer those questions. This is much better than trying to get all the details, because remember, there may be 20 details in the passage. They may ask about 3 of them. So why spend your time trying to understand 20 details? Why not first go and see which 3 they care about, and then go back and find those? And what's even better, since you understand the big picture, you will ideally understand the organization of the passage, how it's laid out, and where you might expect to find a given detail. And so you can only really focus on a small area. Oh, they're asking about blue worms. I think I remember that was in the 2nd paragraph. Let me just go there and look for a keyword or phrase, and I will pretty much be able to get my detail directly. So that's going to be the approach for detailed questions. And that will be a topic for later on, but today we're going to talk about, again, the big picture. And I've been saying that for a while, but I haven't actually done it. So let's do that now. Main idea questions. You will identify the author's primary purpose or main concern. It may be the best description of the whole passage of the author's purpose. Now, couple things on this page that are sort of interesting. I agree very much that the main idea needs to apply to the whole passage and not just part of that. But I want to make a fine distinction here. While the main idea does need to absolutely apply to and encompass the entire passage, that doesn't mean that it needs to explicitly reference the whole passage, okay? Sometimes a main idea question, people will not pick the right answer because they think it seemed a little too narrow for them, because it only kind of called out by name a small piece of the passage. Ultimately, that doesn't matter. The question that I should be asking is this: does the main idea encompass the passage? In other words, when I read the right answer, or the answer that I'm picking, does that answer explain to me why everything in the passage is there, even if it doesn't explicitly reference it? Maybe that first paragraph's not referenced, but maybe you understand that it's certain context that you needed to understand the main idea. Maybe it's background information. You know, if you're explaining how something is new and different, spending a little bit of time talking about what the landscape used to be probably explains what's so new and different about this thing. So even if you don't explicitly reference that, A right answer might just say, explaining what's so new and different about this thing. So again, the right answer will apply to the whole passage. It will explain why the whole passage is there. There won't be any part of the passage that you read and go, well, this doesn't seem to have anything to do with the main idea. But that's what your standard is. It's not, does it explicitly call it all out? Now, the other thing on this page that I want to spend a little more time on is that it says the correct answer will offer the best, not necessarily ideal, summary of the passage. And I agree with that too. The right answers for these questions aren't always perfect. They're not always the exact sentence of description that you would write if you were in charge. But, however, here's the caveat on that. People take this too far and assume that this is all shades of gray. Oh, the right answer is not perfect. The wrong answers are kind of imperfect. So it comes down to, I get these people saying, I always get down to 2 answers, and I always have a good answer and a better answer, and I always pick, a good answer but not the best one. I just don't know how to figure out what the test thinks is the best answer all the time. And to those people, I just kind of want to say, yeah, no, that's actually not how this works. Ultimately, while the right answer may not be perfect, this is not shades of gray. This is not good answers and better answers. And all of the wrong answers are truly defective. Every wrong answer isn't just less than ideal, it's broken. And so if you find yourself always getting down to 2 answers and picking the wrong one, then my suggestion to you is that you probably ought to spend just a little more time at that point with the mindset that there's something actively wrong about one of these answers, that it's one of these 2 answers is broken, is incorrect in some way. And rather than just try to figure out which one you like a little better, which one you think the passage may prefer, try to find the problem with one of them, because I promise you it's there. There is always a real problem with every wrong answer. This is not about shades of gray. All right? Great. So, again, what do we do with the main idea question? Well, we've presumably already read the passage, mapped it if necessary, and again, it may not be necessary. You've understood the main idea, hopefully, so when you read the main idea question, you ought to already have a sense of the right answer. At this point, maybe even before you look at the answer choices, you should make a prediction of what that right answer might be. Having a good prediction makes you less likely to be tempted by appealing wrong answers. Go through the choices, eliminate the ones that have problems or are broken, look for the one that says what you want it to say, what you already know should be the main idea based on your reading, and hopefully at that point you can just pick it. And that's how you do it. Okay? Now, this is all great and wonderful and abstract, but it's abstract. And I think that at this point, an example would be really good to help us see how this works in practice. So that's what we're going to do. What I'd like everyone to do is go ahead and read this passage. It's sort of a medium-length passage, so I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to read the passage and then maybe another 30 seconds or so, up to about a minute, to answer this question. So go ahead and read the passage and choose and answer this question. Feel free to just shout them out in the chat. Don't worry, no one but me will see them. Go ahead right now. Just so you know, we just hit 2 minutes, so you're getting a little more time here to answer the question. I've only got a few of you so far, but hopefully you're getting towards the end of the passage. If you're still reading, I hope you're going to wrap that up relatively soon. Another minute for the question here. Okay, just a few more seconds and we still have a lot of answers missing, so come on people, let's get those answers in. Remember, there is no penalty for guessing. Not answering is wrong answering. Anything is better than nothing. Anyone else? Last chance. I'm gonna close our little non-poll poll here in right now, basically. Okay, let's go ahead and discuss this. Let's see what we've got. We got a whole bunch of B's, got a couple A's, a C, and an E, and like nearly half of you are wrong for just not answering the question. Come on, that's disappointing, okay? Half of you started this with a wrong answer without even trying to get it right. Okay, so the correct answer was B. Kudos to of those of you who have answered it, about half of you who answered picked B. So kudos to those guys. Good job. So let's talk about B versus most picked wrong answer, A. Why is it B rather than A? Does anyone want to tell me that? Why is it B and not A? Remember, there's always something wrong with the wrong answer. So what's wrong with A? Feel free to just type into that question box. Very good. A couple of you gave me the right answer at about the same time. Now 4 or 5 of you actually. Here's some comments that we got. Methodologies. It simply states theories. It doesn't delve into methodologies. Methodologies. Talks about methodologies that is not mentioned in the passage. We didn't explore the methodologies used to evaluate the theories. There's no methodology listed on the message. That's right. It's this right here. Methodologies used to evaluate. Look, if you were to take that out, A and B are almost verbatim the same answer. It would be exploring various ... theories about the moon's shape and formation versus exploring some theories about the moon's shape and formation. It would be almost identical. So the real thing that we had to look at between A and B was whether this is more about the theories themselves or whether it's about the methodologies used to evaluate them. How do you go about evaluating a theory and whatever? That's not the point of this passage. If the author wanted to write this passage, and you ask the question, why did the author want to write this? And you ask, well, is the author really trying to talk to me about the methods by which we evaluate theories? Or is the author trying to talk to me about the theories and ultimately what the right answer is about the moon? And I hope that you were able to see that ultimately the author doesn't so much care how we evaluate the theories. The author does evaluate them somewhat, but the author's ultimate point here is that we want to understand why the moon looks the way it does. And that's what this is all about. So that's the problem with A. It was the methodologies used to evaluate. It's just not really there, and it's certainly not the point. Does everyone agree with that? Even those of you who picked A? I'd love to hear from the A people. I know there were a few of you. Yeah, missed that word and says yes. Okay, great. One thing to note here, is that the GRE cares a lot about precision. One bad word can kill an answer, all right? And we'll see more of that later, so watch out for that. Okay, other wrong answers. What's wrong with C? Anyone? We had a C and an E, so I'll briefly talk about those. Mentioning a second moon, well, but they did mention a second moon, actually. Some geologists posit that the moon absorbed a smaller companion moon. So they did go into that detail. A couple of you said they didn't mention a second moon, but that's wrong. They did. They mentioned that. It's there. Several of you are saying second moon, but that's not why. The problem for me is this. That theory about the second moon is here. And then we settle it. We say this scenario is inconsistent, blah, 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 done. It's settled, it's over. So if that were the point of the passage, if the goal here, the main idea, were to determine the extent to which a second moon is responsible, and we did that in the highlighted box here, then my question would be, why did we keep talking? Why didn't we just say the end on the next line? So my biggest problem with C is not that they didn't mention it, but that it's far too narrow because it completely ignores that that's halfway through the passage, and then we went and talked about some other theories. So in terms of scope, I would argue C is simply far too narrow to accurately encompass the passage as a whole. What do you guys think about that? Somebody said that does not summarize, and I agree with that comment. It may be a fact about the passage, but it is not the summary of it. Okay? All right. We also had an E pick. That's the fact you just gave us. You mean what I was talking about before about how you have to encompass the whole passage? Is that what you're saying when you say that's the fact you just gave us? Definitely something to watch out for. Very quickly, yes, right. Very quickly, what's wrong with E? Since we did also have an E here. No debate? Well, that's not true. Somebody said no debate, but this says right here that debates proliferate. There was definitely a debate. But you know what we never did? Oh, yeah, the craters prior to is probably not true. The prior to the formation of craters, yeah, the shape prior to formation wasn't really the point. Here's something else. So there's really two problems. One is the shape prior to formation of craters isn't really what we were debating. Second of all, resolving. Did we actually resolve anything here? Look here. Debates proliferate. Now look down here. More plausibly. Now look here. Such a scenario would call for. Note the conditional. Note the phrase more plausibly. Is the author saying, ha, we're done. This is it. This is the answer? I don't think so. I think the author is saying, here's a theory. It's believable. It might have some implications that make some sense. But I don't think we resolved anything, especially given that debates proliferate in the present tense. Not debates proliferated, but I've settled it. There are no more debates now. I don't think we've resolved. That's a problem with E and, for that matter, with D. So I agree with you, those of you who said that this wasn't really what we're debating, and frankly, neither was D. So they're not really even talking about the right debates, but they're also wrong because they said that we resolved those debates and we simply never did. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about this problem? Anything at all? Okay, well, I hope that that was helpful. Let's keep moving. And I want to talk now about some wrong answers that tend to show up here and how they can make your life more difficult. You see, wrong answers are really interesting because on the one hand, the common wrong answers are intended to trap you and to make your life more difficult. But on the other hand, once you learn what those common wrong answers are, they suddenly become your very best friends. Because when you start to recognize these patterns, you can almost immediately eliminate them. You can say, oh, I know that game. I know that trap. I'm never going to pick an answer like that because that's a trap. And then all of a sudden, you're not choosing among 5 answers. You're choosing among 4 or 3 or even 2, simply by recognizing what are the traps that they like to use. So here are some things to watch out for. First of all, most obviously, lack of direct support. Wrong answers that just say things that are not true of the passage, that are out of scope, that are outside information, or that just simply aren't true at all. Make sure that if your answer includes factual claims or information, that that information is accurate in the passage. Jumping down to the last one on this page, this goes right along with combines right and wrong information, okay? Here at Ready For, we have a fancy technical term that we like to bandy about for answers that combine right and wrong information. Do you know what we call an answer that is 90% right? We call it a wrong answer. It's just a technical term that we like to bat around. The point here is that we just don't have any sympathy for that 90% right answer. If your answer is great, 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 terrible, great, great, it's wrong. I don't care about all the greats. If there's one thing in your answer that is absolutely flat out not right, it's contradicted by the passage, it's not what the passage is saying, the whole thing dies for it. And they love to do this. They love to give you a great, great, great answer, except for one word, especially one word near the end, because they kind of hope that you've already sort of checked out on it. You've already bought it. You're already like, oh, this is great, great, great. Well, okay, I'm sure the rest of it's great too. Fine, I'm picking it and I'm moving on. You have to go all the way through because sometimes these answers will go right down the tracks and then go screeching off the rails at the last possible minute. And obviously, that's not a train you want to be on. Okay? So 90% of the right answer, it's called a wrong answer. Other things, sometimes the right answer, sometimes the wrong answer is 100% factually true, is 100% stuff that was in the passage, but it answers the wrong question. It's the right answer, but the wrong question. This is especially true in the case of dueling speakers. I kind of mentioned this before. Somebody had to leave a little early. Thank you for attending. We hope to see you in the class. I hope everyone else will hang around though. If they're dueling speakers, it's almost inevitable that there will be a question that'll be, what would person A think about blah, blah, blah? And inevitably, one of the answers to that question will be what person B thought about blah, blah, blah. And of course, that answer is wrong. But it's putting pressure on you to make sure that you don't just pick an answer that was there, that you're actually answering their question. You're answering what the right person thought about. So whenever you see dueling speakers, go ahead and anticipate that they're going to ask that what would person A or person B think about something question, and go ahead and expect that one of the wrong answers to that question is going to be what the other person thought or would have thought. So watch out for that. One more thing I'll throw onto this page and just kind of throw it in there. One tool that they use a lot to sort of sell a wrong answer or hide a right one is detail. They love to give you wrong answers that are super detailed, that involve lots of particular facts and phrases and terms that you heard in the passage specifically. And what they're trying to say is, hey, come on, didn't you remember seeing all these things? This is great. You want to pick this answer. But it's kind of like if you've ever had somebody being a little too nice to you. Have you ever had somebody being just, a little too nice at a certain point? And after a while, didn't you have to kind of stop and go, hey, wait a minute. Okay, what's wrong? What'd you do? Because there's nobody who's that nice, and you're screwed up and you're trying to put something over on me. So when you see them being super detailed in an answer, I'd be a little cautious about that. I'd be a little worried because I feel like they're trying to sell me a bill of goods, and I'm not comfortable with that. On the other hand, often they will be very vague in the right answer, almost overly vague. They'll just be, really generic, general terms. They won't use a lot of specific facts and details from the passage. And what they're trying to get you to do there is say, oh, I don't even know what this is saying. This is just super vague. I don't really see a lot of specifics from the passage. I'm just going to kind of go past this and find something else. Ultimately, if they're vague, it is your job to take each of those vague terms that they're using and identify specifically what in the passage are they referring to. And you know what? Even if they're very vague, as long as they're referring to the right things in the passage, that can still be the right answer and may well be the right answer. So don't get put off by vagueness and don't get sold by detail. They may or may not be correlated with the right answer. So watch out for that. Okay. In terms of, somebody asked about managing time on the reading comprehension, not the primary topic today, but what I'll say about it is that if you can work on your reading, and like I said, the biggest thing you need to do is read at a high level. You ought to be able to get to a point where you're reading these passages in about 2 minutes. If you can do that, if you can read the passage in about 2 minutes for any of these longer medium passages, then that'll give you about a minute per question to do the actual questions on the passage. And sometimes it'll take a little longer, some of the detailed questions do, but sometimes you'll even be able to go faster. For instance, some of the big picture questions, like I said, you ought to be able to know those answers as soon as you get through the passage. So if you're really struggling with time, the best thing you can do is do a lot of high-level reading every day during your preparation to get comfortable with just being able to process these passages quickly. And then, every couple questions you want to check in with yourself and make sure that you're actually keeping that pace. All right? In your practice, try to hold yourself to that pace as well so that you can develop a little bit of an internal clock. Somebody asked about the kind of material to read. Again, there's tons of high-level stuff out there. Some of the ones I cited before: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the journal Science, Scientific American, London Review of Books, any sort of classic famous novels, 50 Shades of Grey, maybe. No, probably not that one. Okay, sorry, different reading list, not that. But basically, if it's classic literature, it's probably fine. A good rule of thumb is if you flip through it and you know every single word on the page, it isn't hard enough. If you flip through it and you have to look up a word or two, that's not the worst thing in the world. It will also help your vocabulary. I think Sherlock Holmes is probably fair. I haven't looked at that in a while. That's probably reasonable. Somebody asked about critical reasoning. Take the course. We have a lecture on critical reasoning in the course. Jump in the course, and I promise we will talk about it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the wrong answers here, and now I want to give you a crack at them in a question so you can see what this is all about. Please go ahead and try this passage. Again, I'll give you a couple minutes, and then I will give you another minute to do the question. Go ahead and try that now. Oh, I was muted. Sorry. We have passed the 2.5-minute mark. We're actually about 2:45 right now. So I hope that you've pretty much finished up the passage and you're starting to get to the question. And I'll give you another 45 seconds to do that. If you can't decide between a couple answers, find a problem with one of them. I promise one of them has a real defect. It's wrong about something. Let's get those answers in. We got a very small number so far. All right, people, just a few more seconds. Pick something. Anything is better than nothing. If you pick nothing, you're wrong. If you don't pick a single answer, you're wrong. Somebody's excited. I like the exclamation point. Okay, last chance. I'm going to talk about this like now. Okay. So looking at the answers we got, we had E, A, can't decide between A and E, A or E, A, one B in there, but pretty much it looks like it comes down to A or E, and it looks, gosh, almost dead even. Yeah, it's like 50-50 between A and E. So let me talk first to you A people, okay? So those of you who picked A, why did you pick A instead of E? Does anyone want to tell me, so several of you picked A, like half of you, why A instead of E? Anyone? More than once in the passage, whether it was a trigger to consider alternatives. I don't know about that. Mainly one big weather disaster. Anyone else want to jump in? Chose A because in the paragraph nothing like snowstorm is talked about. What about the Great Blizzard of 1888? What about, you guys know a blizzard's a snowstorm, right? So I do think a snowstorm is talked about, by the way. It's the Great Blizzard of 1888, created snowdrifts, etc. Okay, tell you what, let me turn this around. Those of you who picked E, why did you pick E instead of A? Okay, before I say that, yes, that's a good answer. Anyone else, why did you pick E instead of A? A bunch of you picked E, talk to me, why? Okay. One of you says, missing the part prior to the natural disaster. And I assume you're referring to this word right here. Another one of you says, suburb system, subway system, I assume you mean, was originated in London already before the US snowstorm. Another one says, it says prior to the natural disaster, the idea didn't originate from the storm, etc. Several of you nailed it. I told you, 90% of a right answer is a wrong answer. And I told you that when it got down to two, and I knew which two it was going to be, several of you were debating the same two answers, there was a problem with one of them. So look at this word originated. Did the weather disaster originate the idea? Well, several of you have already pointed this out. Prior to the natural disaster, New York City had considered building an underground modeled on London's. In 1884, the legislature ordered the lines to be placed underground. Wait a minute, 1884? Wait, when was that weather disaster? Oh, it was in 1888. They thought about this stuff 4 years before the disaster, at least. At least. Okay? So if that's the case, then the snowstorm, the weather disaster, did not originate the idea. That is factually wrong. And that is enough to kill this answer, even if everything else was great. And by the way, a city is a little bit fishy as well because it was really two cities, New York and Boston. But just the fact that they said that it originated and it didn't, that's what makes it wrong. And so I'm really proud of those of you, especially who were between A and E, or maybe even picking A and then switched to E, who when I said there is something wrong with one of these answers, you went and found it. That's what this is about. That's what it's going to take. And you can do it, right? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Oh, you're not doomed. You can do this. Somebody says they're doomed. Come on, you're not doomed. It just takes practice and work, and you can get there. But you just have to understand the level of precision that they're looking for in these answer choices. The other thing I want to say is I wonder, I didn't get a lot of answers about why people picked A, but I wonder whether people may have picked A because it was a little bit more detailed in some ways than E was. Like E says urban development, whereas A says very specifically underground transit system and subterranean utility lines. And I wonder if people kind of looked at that and went, urban development? I don't know what is urban development. That's so vague. But you know, A, like I remember underground transit system. I remember subterranean utility lines. They use those exact phrases in the passage. I remember those exact details. Yeah, it was about transit systems and utility lines and stuff. I wonder if people who picked A picked it in part for that reason. And if you did, then I want to point out that that's the trap here. The trap here is about using detail against you. E is a little vaguer than A. A is a little more detailed. And it's not surprising at all to me that the vaguer answer is the one that was the right answer, because what they were trying to do here is they were trying to sell you the detail to distract you from the fact that they screwed up and used a couple of wrong words earlier in A. So now you know that's the game. So watch out for it. Okay, does anyone have any other thoughts, any other questions before we move on? Very quickly on the other answers, B is both too broad and sort of off topic. Why some of them selected B, somebody says. Yeah, I'm not really sure why B. It's kind of not the point here. It's not just about contrasting participation in them. On the one hand, if you participate, you might not freeze to death. On the other hand, if you don't participate, you could freeze to death. Not really the point. Possible evidence of government corruption, I just don't see that at all in the passage. Resolving a dispute isn't the point. It perhaps may resolve the dispute. You could use the passage to resolve the dispute, but that's not why they wrote it. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on. It's much broader than that. I mean, D doesn't talk about electrical wires or anything at all, for one thing. And it's much more about chronological order between them. So E for sure, right? Are you guys all on E? You all agree with that one? Okay. Very quickly, I'm going to throw one more passage in here and one more chance at this to kind of learn and practice with this, and then we will wrap it up. So, last chance. Let's get this one right, everybody. Okay? Go ahead. We are passing 2 minutes now. Several of you have already gotten the answers in, but if you haven't yet, now's your chance. Give you another 30 seconds, and then we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to wrap it up. Okay, this one went well. I'm so happy. Maybe you guys learned something. I don't know. I hope you did. But time to talk about it. We had an overwhelming majority of B's and like one A and like a D or something. Yes, B is the right answer, describing the unique characteristics of Frank Lloyd Wright's architectural style. So why was it B as opposed to A or D? Who wants to talk to me about that? Why B? Why not A? Why not D? Not A because it talks about 2 eras. Interesting. Let's take a look at that. It says 2 eras in U.S. history. Oh, were they 2 eras? Well, at the same time as Frank Lloyd Wright, architecture continued to be dominated by this other thing. Wait a minute, it sounds to me like these 2 things aren't in separate eras. It sounds to me like they're in the same era. It's at the time of Wright that the Victorian styles are dominant, and they continue to be dominant even as Wright is doing his thing. So yeah, I don't think it's 2 eras of US history. I also want to point out predominant styles. Well, let's talk about that. Was Victorian style predominant? Well, it says dominated by Victorian styles. Was the Prairie School, Frank Lloyd Wright's school, was that predominant? And the answer is I don't see that here. I mean, you and I may know that whenever we go to any major city in this country, we see nothing but bold horizontal lines and low-pitched roofs and brick, and wood and rock, building all the buildings. Okay, no, we don't. That's right, we don't. We don't see that at all. But frankly, whether we do or not, the passage never says that the Prairie School was a predominant style. So I would quibble with predominant styles, the plural there, and I would quibble with 2 eras in U.S. history. I don't think either of those is supported by the passage. What about D? Somebody already has jumped in and said the passage doesn't go into detail about the impact of the Prairie School. What were the impacts? If it says detailing the impact, what were they? And on later architectural movements. What were the later architectural movements? Can anyone name, according to this passage, an architectural movement after the Prairie School? Anyone? Were there even? I mean, maybe the Prairie School was just the end of architecture. There is nothing after that. Frank Lloyd Wright beat it. It's over. Frank Lloyd Wright wins. I don't know from this passage. I don't know if anything happened after that at all. So I don't see impacts of the Prairie School. I see what it was. I see what it was characterized by. I don't see the impact, and I don't see the later movements. And that's why I can't pick D. Do you agree? Especially those of you who picked A and those of you who picked D. Do you agree that those 2 answers don't work? Somebody said, one of the D people said, last paragraph, I think. I'm not sure that this describes impacts at all, but if it describes impacts, it certainly doesn't describe the impact on later architectural movements because it doesn't actually mention the existence of any later architectural movements. So those of you who didn't pick B, do you agree that B should be the answer here and not A and not D? One more thing I'll say. If you had hesitation about B, sometimes people had some hesitation because it just talks about Frank Lloyd Wright. And sometimes people say, well, wait a minute, but it wasn't just about Frank Lloyd Wright. it also talked about the Victorian stuff. And so B is too narrow, right? What gives? Where's all that stuff about Victorian architecture? So what's the response to that? Isn't B too narrow? Because I mean, there's this sentence right here, right? This is not about Frank Lloyd Wright, is it? So talk to me. Isn't B too narrow? Isn't it wrong because of that? Okay, I'm not hearing anyone, so I will answer my own question. The answer is no, it's not too narrow. Here's why. Remember, the right answer to the main idea does not have to explicitly reference everything that happened in the passage. Just because the passage talked about Victorian doesn't mean that my main idea has to talk about Victorian. All it really has to do is explain why it's there. Even if I don't explicitly reference Victorian, I should be able to read my answer and understand why we talked about Victorian style. So if my passage was about describing the unique characteristics of Frank Lloyd Wright's style, does it make sense why we would want to talk a little bit about the Victorian styles that were dominant at the time? And I would say yes. Because if I want to understand what is so unique about Frank Lloyd Wright's style, then I need to be able to contrast it with what everyone else was doing. Uniqueness requires that. And so for me, B does a very good job of explaining why the stuff about Victorian's there. Why did you talk about Victorian stuff? Well, I wanted you to see what made Frank Lloyd Wright so unique and different. I wanted you to understand what he was unique relative to. And when I went and talked about Victorian styles and how they're vertical and all that stuff, then that set up the contrast where I could later say that Frank Lloyd Wright was horizontal, you know? And so ultimately, B does explain why that stuff about Victorian was there. It does encompass the whole passage, and it is actually a really good answer to this main idea question, this purpose. Okay? Does anyone have any final questions? I know that several of you have asked for totally other things, for more stuff on sentence completion or stuff on vocabulary. My answer to all of you is take the course. We are going to be running a course coming up that will cover every single aspect of the verbal on the test. Everything that you need to know, and for that matter, math as well. If you have those sorts of questions, the course is the best option. And I think it's a wonderful course, and we have top-level instructors. Our price is very reasonable, and I promise we will go through all of that, including as well the time management on reading. Again, I've suggested maybe 2 minutes for the passage, 1 minute per question on the reading should work out pretty well for you. But now I need to wrap up. I am at the end of my time, so I'm going to kick it back to the Ready For team to give you all the details on upcoming courses and stuff. All right, guys, take it away.